42-year history. And not many CEOs write books while they're still on the job. We'll get to that. Your book was published today in a global launch, and we're very lucky to have you here for your first extended interview to tell your own story and really the story of technology through Microsoft. We're going to have a discussion for about 45 minutes and then open it up to you for your questions. We are also presenting and taking questions via Facebook Live. So thank you so much for being here, Satya.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for having me.
My first question is, why did you write this book? I mean, it seems a bit risky. CEOs during transformations usually are a bit more cautious. Wouldn't this run the risk of looking a bit odd if it doesn't work out so well?
It's a very good point because most business books, as far as I can tell, are these look backs, either grand successes or grand failures.
Exactly.
In fact, the inspiration for this came from once I went to meet Steve Ballmer maybe 6 months or so after he had retired, and I asked him, "Are you going to write about? Are you writing a book?" And he says, "No, I'm into the future." And that's when I realized that, while going through this process of transformation, I mean, this is not a book about having reached some destination or achieved any success. In the fog of war, I wanted to be able to capture the reflections of the questions and the answers, even if they're not complete. I think of this as we all go through as individuals or as institutions or even as societies through this continuous process of renewal, right? That's where even the inspiration for this hit refresh comes from as the word. And I felt that I needed to reflect on that and capture that while going through it. It's been interesting. I don't know if that is what I had in mind when I started, but I wanted to be able to have this be more of a sitting CEO's meditations on the struggle versus having achieved some success and a look back.
So let's go back to your beginnings of your own story. You grew up in India. You moved around a lot because your dad was in the civil service. And you write that academically you weren't that great. And I think those are your own words. Is that possibly true? Were you really a disappointment academically at a young age?
My dad, for example, was a guy who has never met an exam that he didn't ace. So he would look at my grades and say, "How can this be possible?" But the thing that I remember so distinctly is he never made me feel bad about it. If anything, he had very high he had real intellectual curiosity and ambition. That definitely rubbed off on me. But yeah, that's right. I mean, I was more into cricket than academics. But the one thing that he did tell me, which is, hey, look, a lot of people whom I went to school with used to think that if they aced this one exam, especially the Indian Civil Service was one of those exams where it was very competitive, and they thought, once I crack that, I shouldn't do anything else, or I don't have to do anything. And he said that's the biggest mistake most people make, because the idea that somehow you pass one exam and everything else is fine is not the way life works. It's about really how you push yourself every day. And in that context, even though I've been a slow learner, every day I've gotten a little better than the previous day, and that does help.
Speaking of cricket, we have a photo that I'd like to call up here. I believe it's from 1984 from Hyderabad. And can you just, I know that cricket is not as popular in America as it is in India. Could you tell us, what drew you so much to cricket? What lessons did you learn? Because you really were much more into cricket than studies for a good portion of your adolescence.
Definitely cricket is like a religion in South Asia, I would say. And I was obsessed with it. And our school was a pretty good school team. There were people who sort of graduated from there who went on to play a lot of professional cricket. I think this must have been in my 12th grade. I obviously had a lot of hair at that point. To me, one of the things I think about, besides any team sport, I think team sports are so important because they teach you the importance of teams, which I think is what business is all about. But there's this one incident which I recount in the book the captain I worked for, or rather I played under, this was probably the year before this picture, who subsequently went on to play a lot of professional cricket. I was a bowler or a pitcher, and I was serving up real trash one day, and he replaces me, he brings himself on, he gets the breakthrough for the team, but then he throws it back to me. And I've always asked myself, why did he do that? Like, he could have just replaced me and moved on. And then I understood subsequently that what he did that day was to realize that if he had done that, he would have broken my confidence. But he needed me for the rest of the season. And he threw it back. I did much better the second half of that game, and then I had a pretty decent season. That, to me, is one of those very subtle but very key leadership lessons, right? You can't take your key people, if they fail the first time, pass harsh judgment without understanding the context, what was happening. And to me, that was one of the lessons, quite frankly, I learned on the cricket field.
So your dad gave you what I understand was your first computer at the age of 15. Was there a eureka moment when you put some basic code in and said, oh my gosh, now I know I want to be CEO of Microsoft someday?
That definitely, the second part, no. But the first part, I must say, the notion that software is this most malleable of resources, because I had never understood the power of software. I mean, I have better language to talk about it now than obviously I had at that time. But this notion that you can make things happen out of nothing by just writing a few lines of code was magical. On that Sinclair ZX80, which was my first computer, programming in BASIC was one of the life-changing events. And subsequently, I got an IBM PC with DOS and Microsoft BASIC. And that was the real life-changing event.
So you continue to write muddle along a little bit and kind of against some odds got a visa to go to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And you flew, I think, to Chicago in 1988 when you were 21. I'd like to cue up another picture, actually. I think this was taken in India before you left. But you write, I don't think my story would be possible anywhere else, and I'm proud today to call myself an American citizen. Why is it that this couldn't have happened anywhere else?
I mean, I'm a product, I think, of two amazing things and two unique things about America. The first is American technology reaching me where I was growing up, allowing me to even dream. And it was the enlightened American immigration policy that let me come here and live that dream. And then when I think of that and say, where else would it be possible? Nowhere else. It's just impossible. I mean, I think even we were checking, there is more than 150 countries represented in Microsoft in terms of first-generation immigrants. The Berlin Wall fell. Where did some of the best talent from all of those amazing universities in Ukraine or Russia or Romania or Hungary, where did they show up? They showed up in Silicon Valley and in the United States. So I think that's what makes America exceptional, being both the place where the talent comes, but also being the beacon of hope for the people who need it most. And that's why I think it's something that I think we should hold dearly.
Now, you've spoken out against the Trump administration's immigration policies and the travel ban. How does your personal experience affect your views, and are you worried about competitiveness? Are you worried that, if in a sense the world stops going to America, that this could have a bad impact on Microsoft?
And I think that's the lens through which we should view it, which is what is in our interest as Americans, as an American society and our economy. Clearly, I think that's what's of paramount importance to all of us. And our competitiveness, as you referenced, I think gets enhanced by the participation of the world's talent in our innovation and in our economy. But I don't want us to be only talking about high-skilled immigration, because there's one other quality that the United States has, which is real currency in the world. It's that being that bastion of hope for all people who need it most. I think both of those need to be preserved, and any immigration policy that we come up with should really keep those front and center, because that, to me, is what makes not only America unique, but also gives us the competitive power.
Microsoft and a number of tech companies have come up very strongly on the DACA employees. Do you have several dozen, and are you prepared to fight hard to keep them?
I mean, we are very public about it. We definitely are subject to the laws of the land, but at the same time, we will move the courts to make sure that the people who work at Microsoft, who are dreamers, get all the support they can from us so that they can continue to contribute not only to Microsoft, but to the United States.
Another interesting part of your story is that once you came here, you were actually one of the rare immigrants who gave up your green card. And at the time, people were shocked. Your wife, Anu, was back in India, and you were having trouble getting her here. Could you please tell that story? Because I think at the time, people thought you were absolutely crazy.
It was probably the easiest trade-off, quite honestly, when I think back at it, which is I went, the way the immigration policy works is, if you're a green card holder and you get married, then there's a huge wait list, and that can take years. Even at that time, in 1992, I would say, it would have taken something like 5 years or something. And I'm sure it's far worse now. So I went and saw this immigration lawyer at Microsoft, and he said, hey, it's simple, just give up your green card. And I said, wow. So how does that work? He says, just go give up your green card, get back on an H-1B. And I said, well, that's easy then. That's what I'll do. So I went to and then you can't give up your green card in the United States. You've got to go back to the country in which you got the order, you're going to get your new visa. So I had to go back to Delhi. And I went and stood in line, and I said, oh, I need to stand in the special line where one gives up their green card. They said, there's no such line. And so I had to convince them that, no, this is absolutely true. I do need to give up your green card. And then he says, why do you want to give up your green card? Because I want to apply for an H-1B. And that's when they said, well, this is crazy. How would you do that? Yeah. But that's what I did, and it worked out.
1992, we were talking backstage, is when you had your interview at Microsoft. You'd worked at Sun, and they were recruiting you for your server expertise. You write that you thought that you just bombed the interview because of a question that the very last person who was interviewing you asked.
Yeah. It's one of those Microsoft interviews which lasted, I think, 8 hours of coding on screen, and it was taxing. And the last interviewer, I get to the person, and I say, "Wow, it looks like I've done pretty well, so I should be okay." And the last question was, "What would you do if you see a baby who's just fallen in front of you on a street? What are you going to do?" I said, I thought for a couple of minutes, and I thought, God, this is like some algorithm I'm missing. It's like, there must be some trick, and God, I don't remember reading about this. And after that, I said, I'll call 911. The interviewer gets up and walks out and sort of sends me on my way. And while passing, he says to me, when a baby falls on a street, you pick the baby up and give it a hug. That's what you do. And I said, oh my God, what did I just do? And I thought that there's no way I'm going to get this call, the job, but lo and behold, I did get the job.
You were torn, though, because you were going or thinking of going to business school, right? So you were excited about Microsoft and its mission, but but you kind of wanted to finish business school. So
right. I mean, yeah. So I was leaving actually Sun to go to University of Chicago and business school, and through all of this process, somehow I got even convinced that hey, if you're going to go to business school and not go to Wall Street, not that I have any disrespect for people in Wall Street, but if you want to come back to high tech, why would you go to business school? And that was also pretty a logical question. So the person who was recruiting me convinced me to defer my admission at that time, give it a shot, come and work at Microsoft, and that's what I did. And then eventually I went back through some strange set of commuting and others. I finished my business school, but yeah, I essentially dropped out without even getting to business school.
Family is very important to you, and I want to talk to you, and let's cue the next picture up, please, about your son, Zane. Your son was born with severe cerebral palsy and has shaped your life in many, many ways. You write about how your first reaction was, if I may say, a rather selfish one. You were just upset, and you were upset at what had happened to you and your wife. But through the process of caring for Zane, you learned empathy, which is obviously a core principle of yours. Can you talk about the experience?
Yeah, in fact, as part of even writing this book, perhaps this was one of the harder parts to go back to and even understand in more clearer terms what a pivotal moment that was. And, it was one of those really hit refresh moments that had real profound impact, I think, on who I am today even. I was 29 years old when Zane was born, and both Anu and I, that's my wife and me, he was our first son, and we were both single children. And so the conversation was all about how do we get the nursery ready, how would Anu get back to her architectural job. We were not thinking about anything other than out of the ordinary happening. And lo and behold, on the 13th of August in 1996, Zane's born, and everything changed. Mm-hmm. For the first, even I would say, couple of years, perhaps, I used to mostly, my career was taking off. I was obsessed about, I'd just finished business school. I was all, about, what's the product, what's the technology, and I felt like, wow, this is getting in the way of what I had as my plan. And it was all about what happened to me versus understanding what had happened to Zane. And that's where I think Anu's natural response was. She gave up her career. She was doing all of this work to give Zane the best chance and driving him from therapy to therapy. And it's in watching her. She didn't try to school me on this, but in some sense, I eventually got schooled by just watching her and realizing that nothing happened to me. What happened was to Zane, and what was my responsibility as his father is what I eventually came to. And that ability to see through others' eyes, I would say, is what is empathy. And definitely I learned it through that process, and it's influenced, I think, my work. Because I look at it and say empathy is not just a nice to have at work, it's actually existential. Because if you think about what a business does, we have to innovate to meet the unmet, unarticulated needs of customers. That's the only way we can ever make progress. There's no way we can meet unmet, unarticulated needs of customers if we can't see it through other people's eyes. And so in some sense, I think empathy is what we learn through life's experiences, but it's not just what you do in your life, but what you do in your work as well.
So I want to switch a bit to your Microsoft career. When you started at Microsoft, the mantra was computer on every desk and in every home. And somehow along the way, Microsoft lost its way. You write that it missed out on both mobile and the cloud. How did that happen?
One of the things that I write about in the book is when companies go from being a startup to being a successful company, what happens is you find that novel concept, the novel idea, the novel product that becomes a hit. Around it, you grow this capability. And of course, around that capability and product, you even grow your culture. So in fact, there's this beautiful virtuous cycle between the concept, the capability, and culture. And round it goes. Until a day comes when that product or that concept runs out of gas. Like everything, there's no such thing as a perpetual motion machine. Anything that's growing at 100% will eventually grow at 50 and 20 and 10 and 0, and then negative. The question really is, when the product that made you successful or the concept that made you successful is no longer going to carry the day, do you have the capability to come up with a new concept? But in order for you to do that, your culture has to support it. That's when culture is at a premium, right? It's not just culture reinforcing what you already got. The culture that allows you to question status quo. And when I look at Microsoft, 43 years into our existence, quite honestly, we've gotten a lot right to be here competing with a whole set of new people 43 years after our creation. And in fact, one of the ways I measure it is every 5 years are we competing with a whole bunch of new people. Every year I've been at Microsoft, every 5 years at least I've been at Microsoft, I've been here for 25 years, we've had a new existential threat. It was IBM first, it was going to be Oracle second, it was Sun third. And so over the years, that's what I think we've gotten right, which is we've been able to hit refresh. If anything, and it's not like you're going to, if you are going to hit every trend, catch every wave, then you probably are either very, very lucky or you're not risking enough. And so in some sense, what counts is the average. And when you miss, what you have to do is wait for the turn, because nothing lasts. And in our case, even though we definitely missed the mobile, but we are redefining ourselves, what it means to be on mobile. Right? Our goal is to now have our software on other people's phones. Similarly, on the cloud, we may have been late, but we are the number 2 strong player in the cloud, and really growing faster than the number 1 player. So that's what it takes for a company to continuously renew yourself and know that you're not going to be perfect.
So what's Microsoft's biggest existential threat today?
No, I mean, there is the thing that I feel, and I write a little bit about this in the book as well, is to not view it primarily through a competitive lens, because that's probably the obsession sometimes that can take you off path. Because let's face it, technology today is much more pervasive. And people who are, let's even take the top 5 companies by market cap, we're all very different. We're whatever, number 3. And we're not even counting the Chinese companies. We can even add them, and you would say there are 7 or so companies that all have market caps north of 400 billion. We have great balance sheets. But we're all different. I like to think about what is Microsoft's core sense of purpose and identity and business model versus just looking around and saying, what are the other 6 doing? Because the worst mistake I can make is to assume that we should do what they're doing. And not be true to our identity. And that's where, going back to even our inception at Microsoft, the first product that Paul and Bill created was the basic interpreter for the Altair. This week, on Monday, I was talking about our quantum computing efforts, and the thing that I was proudly showing was Visual Studio, which is our development tool for the quantum computer. Obviously, a lot of distance has been covered from the Altair to the quantum computer. But our identity of who we are, we create technology so that others can create more technology. Especially in today's world where every industry is becoming a software company and a technology company, I think our identity matters even more. And that's what I want us to be true to.
Let's go to when you were named CEO. If we could call up the picture. You were, it's a famous day in February 2014. There had been a lot of talk that, given what was happening, that Microsoft was in the doldrums, that there was no way that they could pick an outsider to be the CEO, that Microsoft really needed an outsider to come in. Did you argue forcefully within the company that you could change it? Or were you a little bit more of an unlikely choice?
You know, I remember, and I referenced this as well, which is during one of the interviews with the board, I was asked, hey, do you want to be the CEO? And I said, only if you want me to be the CEO. And they said, well, that's not what likely CEOs say. And I remember going even to Steve and saying, hey, that's how I feel. And he said, that's right, don't change yourself. It's too late. But the board, I think, did a fantastic job of what I think responsible boards should do, which is look broadly and widely, and then finally did decide to make me the CEO. But during that process, they asked me, do you have a point of view of what I would do if I became CEO? And of course I did. I mean, I'm a consummate insider. I've grown up in the company for 25 years. I know the things that we have done when we got things right, whether it's on product or on culture, where we got it wrong, whether on product and culture. So that has informed all I thought of and was doing at Microsoft before and what I have done subsequently. And so I think it is definitely not. Some people sometimes ask me, did you have a clear idea that when you joined you're going to be CEO? No, not until like the day I became CEO did I have a clear idea. But I do believe at all points I did have a clear view of what our company can do and what I, in the role I had at that time, can do for the company. And that, I think, was the best training I could have ever had.
In retrospect, do you think it helped you that you took on a couple extremely risky assignments? I mean, you took on the cloud business when Amazon was already very strong. I think you write, Amazon was leading the revolution and we had not even mustered the troops. And you also then jumped into consumer with the Bing search engine.
Yeah, I mean, even this, quite frankly, I've understood even more ex post. This is the one part where I was thinking about what prepared me for the job. And it's clear that if I had not worked in these two particular areas at least, because one of the things that working in our consumer space, I was running some of the larger internet consumer properties. And that gave me a great appreciation of what the new data center looks like, which was obviously at the center of what this cloud revolution is. That's what prepared me for our cloud infrastructure job. And that's what, in fact, led to Steve moving me to that job. And clearly, what I achieved in that job and what I was doing in that job is what prepared me to be CEO. But it was not some planned set of moves. Steve was very clear when I went to run some of our search and online advertising, saying, hey, look, this could be your last job if you don't do a good job. But at the same time, I was intrigued by the space, and I do think that that's something that I must say comes pretty naturally to me, which is optimize for the learning potential. And then things do work out. And so to some degree, you can call it risk-taking, challenges, but that's actually been perhaps one of the more amazing opportunities I got at the company.
So your name's CEO. Isn't it a bit awkward? Because you're sitting there being very critical of at least Steve Ballmer and to a certain extent Microsoft's leadership. You said Microsoft needs a new soul.
I said rediscover our soul because
fair enough.
Because as I say, look, I mean, everything that I have learned is by observing Bill and Steve, and quite frankly, I'm proud of the heritage of this company, right? I mean, when the history of business is written, there'll be a chapter for what Paul, Bill, and Steve achieved. But at the same time, being that consummate insider, I have even earned the right to be able to look at things critically. And in fact, the best piece of advice I got even from Steve was, hey, don't try to be like me or don't try to be like Bill, be your own person. And that's what gave me the confidence to be able to look at what we had to do going forward with a fresh set of eyes versus any dogma of the past. And sometimes I wonder whether that confidence to do so came, and the legitimacy to do so came, because I was such an insider. But I don't have to be critical of our past. I just have to make sure that we learn from our past.
You had this instinct that you wanted to bring Bill Gates back into the fold. Was that to get back to the roots? Was that one of the
things that was important, Steve was very clear that, having been the previous CEO, that he was not going to be hovering around to see how I was doing. He had felt that was one of the things that he wanted to be very clear, that, hey, he was the ex-CEO and he wanted to give me space. But it was very important to me to have Bill more involved, because he's the founder of the company. And founders have these magical powers in the sense of just being able to get the best out of your people. When Bill says, come, let's talk about something or review something, I can assure you people will be prepared. And he will be clear also about all the ways they don't meet his expectations. And that's invaluable. His intellectual honesty, his ability to push us and show us the mirror is something that I wanted, as long as he was willing to give us time, because obviously what he and Melinda are doing at the foundation is clearly a big part of his life, and he was kind enough to give us more time, and that has worked out very well.
Tell us a bit about your early attempts and current attempts, really, to change culture at Microsoft. You spent a lot of time on a mission statement, and then one morning sent it to the entire workforce. How was that statement different than what others had? Had Microsoft had a mission statement before?
It's actually interesting, because when you talked about this PC in every home and every desk, when I joined the company in '92, we used to talk about that as our mission. And it is clear, it's quantifiable, it's got a lot of attributes which are admirable. But what happened was, by the late 90s itself, at least in the developed world, we kind of achieved that. And after that, we kind of had a tough time. We would have these marketing slogans, less so mission statements. And I felt that's why it was important. In fact, the two things that I focused a lot on was that sense of purpose and mission, and culture as the two bookends that need to be constant. And you can have ambitious goals. A PC in every home and every desk was an ambitious, audacious goal, which has a temporal aspect. And with every technological shift, you need to have those goals and strategies and competition. But the two things that can remain the constant bookends is your sense of purpose and your culture. And we talk about our mission as being empowering people and organizations all over the planet to achieve more. And if you ask anyone at Microsoft, and I must say this is one of the most satisfying things for me, is these are not just words for us. They're living, breathing guides for all actions, every product we build. You think about it, the products, the software we create, they think about people, but also institutions people build that outlast them. We think about it worldwide. I'm a product of that. But the last piece is probably the most salient in terms of our identity, which is, it's not about our technology or our product. It's what did others achieve with it. Whether it was a kid who used Minecraft to really build these worlds and get into STEM, or it is a writer in Word,
Right.
or someone using Visual Studio and publishing the app that changes the world. To us, though, that's in fact ingrained in our business model, but also our success depends on others' success.
So that gets us into partnerships, which was quite a change in strategy. I mean, Microsoft had a tradition of being very combative and battling Google and Apple in court. And fast forward, and you're spotted on a stage using an iPhone. And you've completely changed the strategy, really, to partnering with companies instead of competing against them.
I mean, this is something that, quite frankly, I learned at Microsoft. In fact, some people forget that Office was first built for the Mac. before even Windows existed. So in some sense, you all have to do is look back into our own history of how we approached it. We are a software company. We care deeply about making sure that what we do is available to users everywhere. And so in some sense, it was a pretty straightforward equation. Whether it's Cortana on Alexa or Office on iOS, we will always support other people's platforms to make sure that the user gets benefits out of what we do. I don't tend to view things as always zero-sum. There is definitely zero-sum competition. We don't shy away from it. But we don't let that cloud the fact that we could have a broader opportunity if we, together with some partners and competitors, solve some unique problems that customers have.
You inherited an acquisition that was pretty messy, the Nokia acquisition, and you write that you actually voted against it. And then it closed 5 months after you became CEO. It seems like this was one of the more difficult things. That you had to eventually write down the entire purchase and lay off many thousands of people. Could you talk about that experience and then what led you to actually make some other acquisitions?
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear about the facts, and in the book as well, I was not on the board, so it was more Steve going around the room asking for opinions. Okay. So it's not a vote per se. But that said, I think when I became CEO, I wanted us to have real differentiated point of view on how we're going to tackle this challenge of relevance in mobile. The first and foremost thing of importance was to make sure that our applications and our software, our cloud, I mean, in some sense, I believe, in fact, the lesson for me is that from the PC was that anytime anybody says, oh, we've figured it out, there is this ultimate device that's going to be a hub for all things for all time to come, it's not going to be the case. For 20 years or so, most people thought of that PC as that. And now, of course, every conventional wisdom is that the phone is the last device until it's not. And so therefore, I always said, okay, having missed it, being not number one or number two, let's go and make sure that we ride it and then look for the next bend. That was sort of a strategic choice I wanted to make and start taking a unique, different path. But in the process, it was a hard call, especially hard because of the people impacted. More than any strategy call, the thing that I've had to learn that CEOs have to do is make these hard calls. And having made that hard call, then you've got to carry that out, knowing that it's going to impact people. And I did, and everyone in the company did everything they could to help the people there find their next play. And to me, that was really the part around Nokia as well as our mobile strategy. I feel very, very good. Some of the fastest growing businesses at Microsoft are cloud services that attach to iOS and Android and Windows devices, because it's really the mobility of the human experience across devices. It's about the person, not the device. That's the secular shift that's happening. To your other point, we bought Minecraft. That is, I was coming from our enterprise side. The first acquisition was Minecraft. And most people were like surprised, what does this guy know about gaming? But Minecraft to me was a quintessential. Gaming is actually a massive passion for Microsoft. Xbox obviously is a very loved brand. PC gaming is a growth market today. And is bigger than even the console gaming market. And so to us, gaming has always been important, and Minecraft is the best-selling game on the PC ever. And it doesn't hurt that it is one of the top-selling, or it is the top-selling game on the phone. And so to me, it was a no-brainer decision.
When you launched Windows 10, you did it in Kenya. And this was a really important product launch for you. That a number of former launches had not been received that well. And it's a tradition to,
come to Times Square.
Go to Times Square, get the Rolling Stones, do some really cool things. But why Kenya? You must have given up a little bit of, and here's a shot from that day.
Yeah, the school. The idea there was to get back in touch and telegraph as much back to our own engineers and our own product managers and our own employees that look, we are a worldwide company. We operate in 190 plus countries. The products we use. I mean, if you look at Microsoft's presence, it's ingrained. We have 1 billion users of Windows all over the world doing very mission-critical things, whether it's education, healthcare, immigration offices of every country. You go through these passport lines that are running Windows. So in some sense, to me, it was very important to be in touch with it and make sure we're not just building. I felt like the entire zeitgeist of what was happening in tech was these consumer consumption-led. And we are not that. We are creation-led. You buy Microsoft products, you use Microsoft products because you want to create. And I wanted us to be able to sort of see that market expansively, by looking at, hey, what are small businesses in Kenya doing? What are students in Kenya doing? What are multinationals with high ambition in Kenya doing? That's why we did that. It is as much as to inspire ourselves.
In the current political climate, CEOs have come under a lot of pressure to bring jobs to America, and Microsoft gets more than half of its revenue outside the US. You're in 190 countries. Is the idea of a multinational company under threat? Does it need to change?
I think that the idea of a multinational company is going to be foundationally based on what value have they added in every country that they operate in. It's clearly, it's America first in America. It's UK first in UK. It's India first in India. China first in China. I mean, that's to be expected. And for us to participate, we've got to be able to sort of answer for ourselves and to every public official and head of state, what have we done for their educational outcomes, health outcomes, their public sector efficiency, their small business productivity, their multinational competitiveness? And if you can't, then what is the value that you bring? And to me, that's what makes, quite frankly, Microsoft unique. One of the things that gives me the greatest pleasures is to be able to, whether I come to the New York region or whether I go to Istanbul, I can have that conversation with confidence of what we have done. And how we've contributed. And that's why I think multinationals, companies that have a virtuous business model that not only creates surplus for our shareholders, but is more importantly creating surplus all around, I think is going to be the real currency for a multinational going forward.
You acknowledge, as you look to the future and AI, that jobs are a key concern. Is training the answer? I mean, you write that you expect 3 mega trends to converge, and there's going to be considerable displacement.
The first thing, we should definitely come and have a very concrete conversation on the displacement piece. But one of the things that I do feel that is overlooked is the power of AI and what it can do to, in fact, create inclusion. For example, one of the things that we launched a new app called Seeing AI. In fact, it's on the Apple App Store. It's powered by a lot of our cloud machine learning and computer vision technology. And I was very recently talking to a colleague of mine, Angela Mills, who has visual impairment. In fact, I worked with her very closely when I'd first initially joined Microsoft. And she was telling me how it's changed her life because she can now go into our cafeteria, read the menus, see the ingredients in products, walk into conference rooms with confidence, knowing that this is the conference room that she needs to get into versus barging into a meeting that she was not invited to. So that means she's fully participating as an employee at Microsoft because of AI. We recently launched some learning tools in Word which allows kids with dyslexia to be able to read. We, in fact, launched some eye gaze technology, AI that allows you to type just with your eye gaze, super important for anyone who's quadriplegic or has ALS. So when I think about AI and what it can do, it can empower people to more fully participate in our economy. And we should grab hold of that opportunity. But we should be clear-eyed to your point, which is, will it create displacement? Will there be automation that causes that? And so the answer to that, to me, is the first one which you referenced. Let's do our very best work as a company, as a society, in education. Let's make sure that the boys and girls in school are being taught a relevant curriculum for jobs of the future. Let's not stop there. In fact, let's go to mid-skills and high skills even at the workplace. And in fact, that's why I'm very excited about LinkedIn. What LinkedIn does is essentially creates an economic graph and a digital feedback loop between the jobs, the skills, and the training required. And it's a continuous cycle. It's not a static graph, but it's something that evolves. And so therefore, let us use those kinds of mechanisms to help people continually upskill themselves or right-skill themselves so that they can get the jobs of the future. I also believe we should not fall victim to this fallacy of a lump of labor. In fact, we should study the Industrial Revolution. Some of the same concerns were there. In fact, let's not make some of the same policy mistakes, or at least take so long as we took during the Industrial Revolution. And think about what are the new jobs. I see, again, I'm inspired by the Minecraft generation. In a world where there is a lot of abundance of AI, what is going to be scarce will be real intelligence. So I think people-on-people jobs, digital artisanal jobs are going to be in demand. And we should create the right wage support structure for it. So that's at least how I think. We'll have to really think through it comprehensively, but there are solutions to be found.
Before I open it up for your questions, one last question on gender. You had an experience that you write about where you kind of stepped in it a bit, and during an interview wrote that it was good karma for women not to ask for raises. What did that experience teach you, and what is your view of what's happening now in Silicon Valley in terms of pay equity and really a number of resignations and a sense of the sexual harassment that we haven't seen in perhaps ever?
Yeah, it was a complete nonsensical answer I gave, as I sort of recount even in the book, and because I was answering a question literally using my own personal experience without understanding the broader context of the question, which quite frankly is unacceptable, right? For a person like me who's a CEO of a major company, my job now is about creating the system that allows women to participate, for women to feel free to ask for a raise, for them to expect to be recognized and make progress. And in fact, when I went back even and I talked to some of the very successful women who work most closely with me and heard their stories, I realized that I really had not internalized how the system was not working. So the idea that anyone should passively accept it was so wrong-minded, as Maria Clave so kindly corrected me on stage. And so I think I learned a very deep lesson that one's own personal experience sometimes can be an unconscious bias. And especially writ large at a society level. And so I got to work on what I needed to work on, which is to work on what are we doing at Microsoft for gender diversity? What are we doing at Microsoft for ethnic diversity? What are we doing to not only bring people in, but to help them make progress? We always had equal pay for equal work. But it is really more about equal opportunity for equal work that is the real challenge. And how do we work that? So those are things that we have gone to work, and we have a lot of distance. And you brought up in tech, let's face it, we do have a significant distance to cover. In the last 2 years, at least in terms of the incoming women representation has improved a couple of points to 27.7% at Microsoft, which is obviously not sufficient. In engineering ranks, where the gap is higher, we've improved by 5 points, which is good, but not sufficient. So every day our goal is to push and push to make progress, and that I think now I internalize is my core responsibility.
I'd like to take your questions. We have Sean. There's a couple right up. One right up here in the front row, I see. Sean?
Hey, thanks so much. So I think an interesting common ground between a lot of software companies today is that they were founded by students and in the dorm room. You think of Facebook, Google, and Microsoft as well. What do you think are ways in which big companies and institutions at large can leverage and harness the creative power of students? And also, what is your opinion on efforts that are currently taking place to do these kinds of things, like the Teal Fellowship and Dorm Room Fund?
I mean, look, first of all, the entrepreneurial energy of students is perhaps the most powerful force there ever was. And somebody, one of my venture capital fund friends was telling me, you should really be on lookout for kids who drop out of Harvard. If they graduate, don't fund them. And so I think that there's something to be said about it. And so to me, for example, I do lots and lots of college calls to recruit because I know that the only way Microsoft will stay relevant and renew itself is to have people who come with fresh set of ideas, who are risk on, who are willing to tell the CEO to buzz off and say, here is what the right product to build or the right technology to bet on. But so I think our competitiveness as a country, any country that is trying to really capitalize on the human capital, needs to infuse more of these tech skills into that class and give them even the capital required. And I think in the US, we definitely have that structure. You can, as I said, graduate and get the funding to create companies. And it's a lot, like when I think about the capital required to start up something today, especially because of the cloud, it's come down dramatically. It's no longer what it was even when I started in the workforce. So I think the secular changes are right behind anyone with high ambition to be able to do anything at this point.
We have a number of questions from Facebook Live. Jonathan from Facebook asks, what is the hardest decision you've had to make personally or professionally?
I think the hardest decisions are always, at least as a CEO, I would say that ones that weigh the most on you are things that are these restructurings. And restructurings not as capital allocation or on some abstract level, but things that impact people. They're not easy because we're all human and to be able to, I do believe CEOs have to make hard calls. Somebody even asked me the harsh question, which is, hey, you talk about empathy. How can you be an empathetic leader and then lay people off? Mm-hmm. And I've thought deeply about that, and it's hard because in some sense I've come to realize that in fact, I was thinking about the 100,000 people at Microsoft and the future for that, our entire company, and then carrying out these restructurings such that we do that with dignity for the people, and then they really help them find their next level. Those are the hardest ones. Quite frankly, business strategy and doing collaborations, getting in and out of things, and so on, are hard, but nothing as hard as this.
Mm-hmm. Question in the front row.
Hi there. My name is Arjun, like Argentina without the Tina. My question to you is the role of mentors. You talk about people. Who's the one person that you would say you owe your career to as someone who's been a good mentor to you? And the reason I ask that is because I've done 2 venture-backed companies since I was a teenager. Would love to talk to you about one of the ones I'm working on now. However, every single time I've received a check, I've gained a new father, a new mother, essentially, in that relationship, someone who has had a profound effect on me. Who was it for you? Or
that's a great, I've been blessed in that sense. with the leaders. I mean, we talked a lot about Steve and Bill and what they meant to me, and clearly I've learned a ton from them. And the one person, this is something that I recount even in the book, who had a very profound impact on my outlook, was a gentleman by the name of Doug Burgum. He happens to be the governor of North Dakota right now. He had said something to me. I was probably in my mid-30s, and he said, look, you're going to end up spending more time at Microsoft than with your kids. And when he first said it, I didn't know what he was saying and why he was saying it. And he went on to say that you better figure out a way for work to have deeper meaning. And that has been something that I would say over the period of the last 15, 20 years even, really changed how I myself get satisfaction in my job, not just now, but all through. And then also what I want everyone in the company to feel. Like I sometimes think that the best way to think about working at Microsoft is to think of Microsoft as a platform that works for you to be able to go after the passions that you have. Versus the other way around. And so these world views that some of these mentors can give you to not only have a profound, they can help you pick well, guide you well on critical decisions, but a mental framework sometimes or a mindset shift is probably more powerful. And at least in my case, whether it was Jeff Rakes or Kevin Johnson, whom I worked for, who's actually the CEO of Starbucks now, or Doug Burgum, have all been amazing leaders who have influenced how I think and also how I operate.
And just to jump in here, we talked about your dad. Your mom was perhaps an even more profound influence. Can you just quickly talk about her views?
I've thought a lot lately. I lost my mother 2 years ago, and as part of writing this book even, I've thought a lot about the choices she had to make, just like how Anu, my wife, and the choices she had to make. My mom was a Sanskrit professor, and my dad was a civil servant, and his job would take him to different places. And so she tried to really continue her profession for a long time. And unfortunately, she couldn't because when she took a break with my birth and my sister's birth, she was not given that opportunity to get back into the workforce, which I think is one of the challenges that women face when they have to take the break and get back into the workforce. But one of the great influences of hers was she, perhaps more than anybody else, helped me realize that, look, you may have high ambition, which I got from my dad in terms of at least intellectual curiosity, even if I was academically not that great. The thing that I did get from my mother was to be able to live in the moment, not in a trivial way, but in a way to deeply learn, enjoy, be in touch with what was happening. And the more I think about it, that skill perhaps is more important than just having curiosity. Curiosity and ambition are important to do anything, but if you are not able to, when I say I was not waiting to become CEO to do my best work, I think I learned that from my mother.
Any other questions? Ooh, a lot. Right there.
Hi. I'm very curious. You, as an active sports person, myself, I'm an active sports person. What do you think of this whole new e-gaming, e-sports, and how do you think about that? Because there's not a lot of activity, it seems to me, that's going on in that. And where do you think that's going to go?
E-cricket?
Look, here's the way I look at it. I don't think the comparison of esports should be to active sports. The comparison of esports should be watching a lot more of online video. The real zero sum, if you want to think about it, or the market definition. If you look at what's happening, we have a product called, or a service called Mixer, which is game watching. And it's, in fact, one of the interesting attributes of that is it's interactive even. When I look at it, what people do, it's fascinating. It's, of course, used for gaming, but you can even watch people paint, people code. And so it's become now a broadcast, essentially, medium for all kinds of activity, and people participating and watching and even directing. And so to me, I think that that's more fun, or at least it gets out more creativity than watching one more show that you don't have time for. And so therefore, I'm all into esports and things like game streaming with interactivity as alternative forms of active entertainment, if there is such a category.
Another question from Facebook Live from Donna. How do you think robotics will impact Microsoft's business and workforce in the next 10 years?
I think that the place where robotics is having the profound impact is in the industrial setting, and the industrial robots, and in logistics. That's where I think the impact of the robots will be most felt. But I think the broader question will be, again, this notion of AI. When you think about AI, you can broadly think of 3 levels of AI, or 3 simple ways to comprehend it. Can we build AI that's better than humans in perception, which is, can it hear, see, recognize? That's, I think, something that we have really made tremendous amount of progress in the last 5 years, and you see it in all of the speech recognition, commodity cameras that can detect objects. The next is cognition, and that is the ability to think and solve problems in novel ways. And I think we now are at the place where you can do that, at least in certain domains. We don't have the ability to take learning in one space and apply it more generally like humans do. But although even that, I think, is something that we're making progress on. The last is the ability to act, to move. That's where a lot of what's happening with self-driving cars is probably setting the pace, even, of what it's really a robot on wheels.
Yeah.
To me, we are going to make progress on all of these 3. They're going to have profound impacts at Microsoft or elsewhere in terms of the jobs we do. But the key place I think we should focus on is how do we evolve our jobs so that they go along with the machines? What new jobs will get created as these new machines get created? As there are more autonomous drones, there is such a thing as controlling those autonomous drones. Who does that job? I think that's at least how the impact will be.
Another question right there.
Hi, thank you. So you oversee a lot of different teams that create products that allow people to communicate, whether it's Skype or Outlook or Mixer and Xbox Live. I mean, we could be here for a long time. But my question is, how do you think about balancing people's right to express themselves and the sort of benefits that come from doing that, even if they're controversial ideas, with protecting people and protecting the spread of false or misleading information?
It's a great question. I mean, I think the thing that is required on a lot of these around being a platform for free speech and making sure that what borders on hate speech is not on your platform, or balancing the need for national security and privacy. These are all tough issues. But for us as technology companies and technology platform providers, especially around communications, you've got to have a principled stance. For example, if you look at the way we have at least tried to work the issue around national security and privacy, we have a case that's, I think, going to go to the Supreme Court around the jurisdictional rights of the government on data that's not stored in the boundaries of the United States. It's an important case. It's going to be precedent-setting. We believe that the privacy of whether it's an individual or an organization needs to be protected. And the conditions under which it is not should be transparent. Therefore, that means there needs to be a framework of law, ultimately, that the legislative process / courts have to come up with. But until such a time, we will take principled stance on all of these issues around security and privacy. And we will always err on the side of ensuring the liberties of individuals. That, I think, is how we will approach it. But I'm also very clear that we are not elected officials. We don't have a mandate. And so, therefore, we also will welcome the legislative process to work on behalf of the citizens, and not just in one country, and this is sometimes what is missed, is the web, the internet, and digital technology, in some sense, needs new laws that even understand that information does flow freely. And so there needs to be an equilibrium, especially between the US and the EU, and with China. And that then can set precedent for the rest of the world.
So it sounds like, and we have to wrap up here, but it sounds like you expect, to a certain degree, greater regulation of tech, whether it's the privacy law in Europe and...
I mean, GDPR, for example, that's the European law on privacy, is something that we are working on. So it's not something that we expect. We are living with laws that protect privacy. And I believe it's going to essentially be de facto the standard for privacy all over the world. So to me, we should, wherever there are laws like that are being formed, do set a yardstick for us. But at the same time, we don't have to wait for regulation. We have to do what is right based on these enduring values and principles.
Well, we are out of time. Satya has kindly volunteered to sign books